The Berenty Private Reserve is one of the easiest places in Madagascar to see lemurs. It has been owned and protected by the Dome family for most of the last century. It is situated on the west bank of the Mandrara River in the south of Madagascar, about half a square mile of gallery, or riverine forest, surrounded by what used to be spiny forest and is now mostly sisal plantation. The gallery forest is characterized by large stands of tamarind, or kili, trees, an important food source for the lemurs. There are 3 species of diurnal lemur in Berenty, of which one, the brown lemur, has been introduced from other parts of the island. There are at least 2, and possibly more, species of nocturnal lemurs. The ringtails, or lemur kata, or maki in Malgache, are probably the best known of the lemurs, as they do well in zoos and are fairly easily seen without going to Madagascar. They live in groups of 3 to 30 individuals called troops. Generally, the females will be related, while the males migrate into a troop. The ringtails are one of the most terrestrial of all lemurs, spending perhaps 40% of their time on the ground. At Berenty, they are quite happy to use human trails to walk on, sit on, or fight on. Often, human trails mark the boundaries between different lemur troops. To get better views, ringtails will occasionally stand on their hind legs. Of course, the ringtails are also quite happy in trees. And even in the cactus-like alaudia plants that grow in the spiny forest, the ringtails will happily leap from plant to plant in spite of the thorns growing on the branches. Some leaps can be quite spectacular. Here a mother, with an infant on her back, leaps across a gap of perhaps 10 feet. Here a troop of lemurs prepares to start the day. They have come to the edge of the forest and survey the open countryside before jumping out. As we saw earlier, ringtail mothers generally carry their infants on their backs. Very young infants will ride on the stomach, but they quickly move to the back as they age. This does not seem to discommode the mother much. She can still leap great distances with her infant, and will even instigate fights. Here she has driven off an importunate male. Occasionally, ringtails will have twins. Even more occasionally, semi-albino infants are born. Infants nurse. Infants like to play, but they also learn the serious requirements of life, such as grooming. Grooming is surprisingly important. In addition to simple cleaning, grooming has a social function. Subordinate adults will groom dominants in order to placate them. Ringtails are expert sunbathers. On cool mornings they will sit in the sun to warm up. Early in the morning they sunbathe in trees to get the best views of the sun. Later, once the sun has reached the ground, they will also sunbathe there. Note how vigilant they are, checking for aerial predators. At midday, The temperature can be very high, and the ringtails choose to siesta for a few hours until it drops. Their primary food source is the tamarind tree, where they will eat leaves, fruit, flowers, and young buds. Here an animal is eating young leaves. Notice how carefully it selects which leaves to consume, passing over the older, darker leaves for the most succulent young ones. This tape was shot in April, before there was much fruit on the trees, but here an animal is eating a very green tamarind pod. But their diet is not restricted to tamarind. They consume more than 25 different species of plants, as well as odd things like dirts, and very rarely insects and lizards, and once a mouse. They also eat flowers. Here is one selecting flowers from acacia. They do not make very good pollinators, at least of this tree, for although they leave the petals intact, they do usually consume the stamens. Ringtails will eat fruit from many different trees. This round fruit is from a cretiva tree. Notice how the animal has picked it up off the ground and then climbed up, possibly to avoid molestation by its troopmates. The dried fruits of the melia tree lie on the ground in drifts. The animals crack off the rind and suck the dried coating from the seed. But ringtails do not restrict themselves to forest trees. They also eat the more desert-like plants from the spiny forest. Here they are eating capris, a relative of the caper. And here they consume the pads of the prickly pear cactus, not an indigenous plant to Madagascar. In times of drought, they will also use this plant as a source of water. They eat from many other desert plants. I have seen one eat leaves from a crown of thorns, a euphorbia with sap that is poisonous to humans. And they will eat sap and gums. And wood that has been decayed by termites. Sometimes they will lick a sugary substance secreted by these insects. And they always eat dirt, but not just any dirt. They only eat it from certain well-defined places, and it can become a source of contention. Here, a dominant drives off a subordinate from her dirt. In more open areas, they will consume small herbaceous plants, such as these. Here, one has decided that my hat provides a good supply of something, probably salt. Ringtails do not generally share food, but infants will beg and occasionally steal. In April, the ringtails start digging in the ground, a very strange occupation, and then eating the fruit of a species of hydnora, which apparently grows just under the surface. This appears to be a very desirable food and leads to a number of fights within a troop. Ringtails have a strong system of dominance, with all females dominant over all males at all times. This is most obvious in feeding situations, although technically it isn't called dominance then. Subordinates will usually run away squealing when a dominant approaches. We saw an example of that when they were feeding on dirt earlier. But sometimes fights will break out. Female dominance makes mating a little trying on the males. Here, a male approaches a female and is cuffed. But dominance usually shows itself not in fights, but in avoidance. Here the animals at the back could not move until the dominant ones in front moved first. So they waited. Ringtails have many different calls. We have already encountered some, like the spat, the squealing call made by a subordinate. The following is by no means a complete list. Ringtails also use scent to communicate. Not only can they determine each other's sexual status by smell, but they will also leave scent marks, generally to mark their territories. The females commonly leave anogenital marks, rubbing their rears against a substrate. The males occasionally leave genital marks too, but more often they leave wrist marks. They have spurs on their wrists which become covered with scent, and with which they gouge saplings, forcing the scent into the wood. Males' wrist spurs look like this. It is not uncommon to have a female genital mark a tree and then have the males follow behind her, leaving wrist marks. Ringtails also have scent glands on their upper chests and will occasionally rub this on a substrate. This is a fairly rare event. Males have another means of distributing scent. They rub their tail between their wrists, imbuing it with scent, and wave it. Sometimes this is used as a long-distance weapon against other males, and sometimes as a valentine to a female to show her the male is ready to mate. Females usually do not care for these smelly presents. Juveniles will also attempt to show their readiness to mate, but they don't always get it right. Here a juvenile fails to anoint his tail, but otherwise goes through the proper motions. As the mating season approaches, the males spend more time checking up on the estrus status of the females. And they start following the estrus females. But ringtails are female dominant, and it is the female who chooses the male, not the other way round. This is the same female who was being followed earlier. Here she picks out a mate. Interestingly enough, the male is from a different troop. Female ringtails are in estrus for only about 24 hours per year, though if one fails to become pregnant, or if her fetus aborts, she may try again 6 or 7 weeks later. The male leaves the female briefly to drive off other suitors. But as the male is from outside the troop, the couple finds it easier just to sneak off privately. They conclude their mating on a nearby cactus. The male grooms himself, the female does not. Then the male jumps off, again to drive away other males. The female now has a white sperm plug in her vagina. The male continues to guard her for 10 or 20 minutes. Here we have another mating, this time between the dominant female and the dominant male of a troop. The mating is out in the open, and the male spends more time during the mating chasing other males from the female. Even so, all is not easy. Another female approaches. As females are dominant to males, he cannot chase her. Juveniles will also attempt to mate, but again, they don't get it quite right. Ringtails spend more time making war than making love. At Berenty, they are intensely territorial, and will chase, and even fight, other troops which encroach on their land. These territorial battles are hard to film. One moment, nothing is happening. The next, one troop is chasing another for 25 yards, and then again, nothing happens. The animals have reached an accepted boundary and sit and stare at one another. Less frequently, these chases erupt into actual fights, with females attacking and males wafting scent to the opposing troop. Usually ringtails will ignore, and be ignored by, other species of lemur, but occasionally they will interact. Here, a ringtail displaces a Shaak from a hydnora fruit. Two different subspecies of brown lemurs have been introduced to Berenty and have hybridized until there are few purebreds of either subspecies left. One subspecies, the calaris, is native to the rainforests about 50 kilometers east. The other, the rufus, shares the spiny forest with the ringtails a bit further north. Brown lemurs also live in troops, usually of about 10 to 15 individuals. At Berenty, they have become almost as terrestrial as the ringtails, although in other forests they are far more arboreal. The brown lemurs are sexually diachromatic. In other words, the different sexes are different colors. At Berenty, the most common coloration is that of the rufus subspecies, where the females are brown and the males are grayish. Occasionally darker individuals are seen. These show some calaris traits. They frequently use human trails. They also have a rather peculiar method of leaping from the base of one small tree to the next. Of course, they are quite at home walking in the trees. And leaping between trees. The brown lemurs give birth a little after the ringtails, in August or September. Occasionally they will also have twins. The infants ride curled around their mother's belly, just in front of the thighs. Brown lemurs like to play. Again, tamarind provides a favorite food. Here an animal is eating the leaves of the tree. And here one is eating a tamarind pod. They eat other things as well, like cretiva fruit, and the gum of certain trees. Brown lemurs will eat insects, such as these caterpillars that live under the bark of acacia trees. And of course, dirt. Very rarely, brown lemurs will commit infanticide and eat infants, both of their own species and of the ringtails. Here, a female eats an infant, not her own. The earlier infanticide was observed, but not filmed. The hydnora fruits are greatly desired. The brown lemurs are normally fairly non-hierarchical animals, but in the presence of hydnora fruit, at least at the start of the mating season, the males have definite feeding priority, whereas in the ringtails, the females always do. Here a female waits while two males eat a fruit. And here a female is slowly displaced by a male. And here a female is more forcibly displaced. Sometimes the fights can get fairly fierce. Hydnora is a very desirable food source. But not all fights are explained by hydnora. Here, a male and a female brown lemur chase and cuff high up in the trees. Often, the browns will pay no attention to other species of lemurs, but occasionally they will displace them. Here, a brown and a Shaak annoy one another until eventually the brown drives off the Shaak. In addition to their various vocalizations, the browns leave scent marks behind. Here a female sniffs a branch and then anoints it with her anogenital region. Males will often mark on top of an area that a female has marked. Males will rub the tops of their foreheads or their hands on an area that a female has marked, coating themselves with her scent. Males have their own peculiar habits. They will anoint females as well. In this species, male and females will often hang out together. This is not a true pair bond, and it is not always associated with reproduction. Males will often anoint their female in times of stress, before a troop meet, for example, or, as here, during the mating season. Sometimes during the mating season, the males will check a female's genitals, presumably to detect if she is in estrus or not. Here, a pair goes through much of the process of mating, but without achieving intromission. The Shaak are the third diurnal species to live at Berenty. They are members of a different family of lemurs, the Indradae, a family containing the largest living lemurs, and indeed, this species is the largest at Berenty. The name Shaak is taken from the alarm call of the species. This species is the least likely to travel on the ground, but when it does come down, it dances. It will also occasionally perform the same dance along wide, horizontal tree branches. The most common form of locomotion is termed vertical clinging and leaping, where the animal clings to a vertical trunk and leaps to the next. Shaaks enjoy playing, and here a troop plays as they leap around an open area. They also indulge in acrobatic play by themselves. Like ringtails, they will sit in the sun on a cold morning to warm up. Unlike ringtails, they rarely sunbathe on the ground. All the lemurs of Berenty enjoy the fruit of the tamarind tree. Here a young Shaak gnaws on an old tamarind pod. But they are more commonly seen feeding on leaves and flowers, rather than fruit. Here a Shaak feeds on a flowering vine in the top of an alaudia in the spiny forest. Here one eats the new flower buds of a euphorbia tree, a food source that would probably be poisonous to humans. And when in season, all species seem to like hydnora fruit. As with the other species, this can lead to aggression. Again, scent marks are another important means of communicating. Here a Shaak marks a small tree with its anogenital region. And here one animal marks a spot. And a little later, another overmarks at the same spot. Shaaks also mark with their throats. Here an animal mixes a few genital marks among a series of throat marks. In addition to alarm calls, Shaak have another behavior pattern that indicates alarm. Sometimes the head throw is done without vocalization. Other times it is accompanied by a Shaak call. Most lemurs indulge in mutual grooming sessions, and the Shaaks are no exception. They will also self-groom. The larger of the nocturnal species is the leper lemur. This is a solitary species that tends to live in tree holes. It will poke its nose out of its hole in the late afternoon, but will stay within a foot or so until dusk falls. It eats mostly leaves. Here it is eating the leaves of an alaudia tree. There appear to be at least two populations of mouse lemurs at Berenty. The one shown here in the gallery forest is probably the grey mouse lemur. The other, in the spiny forest, is less easy to identify. Tenrecs are small nocturnal insectivores found only in Madagascar and Africa. They have a fairly primitive anatomy as placental mammals go. The lesser hedgehog tenrec forages on low branches and amid the leaf litter. Its predator defense is similar to that of its namesake. It curls into a ball with spines pointing out. Flying foxes are large fruit bats. Indeed, this genus contains the largest of all bats. This species has a wingspan of up to 4 feet, but is not quite the largest. Bats roost in trees during the day, in large colonies. This roost site is seasonal, currently with about 6 trees in use, containing a few hundred individuals. But at other times of the year, about 20 trees will be used, containing in excess of 1,000. During the day, the roost is a very noisy place. The bats are easily alarmed by people, or raptors, or ground predators, and will sometimes fly off en masse if disturbed. Late April is the start of the mating season, as may be seen by the erect genitalia of the male. Infants are probably born in October. Bats can climb on the undersides of tree branches, sometimes moving quite rapidly. This male may be checking his territory to remove other males or to search for estrus females. At dusk, they will fly away to find fruit, sometimes traveling as much as 25 miles to find a suitable supply. They will also feed on and pollinate the flowers of the local sisal plantation. Unlike most bats, they do not use echolocation, but have good night vision. On hot days, which includes most days at Berenty, bats will cool themselves by fanning their wings. This male is attempting to determine the estrus status of the female by smelling her. She is not exactly pleased by the attention and attempts to flee. In most matings, the male will mount from behind, attempting to pin the female's wings and holding the scruff of her neck in his mouth so that he won't fall off.
Ça y est, les photos, les gardez les miens tous.